Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We'll shortly be starting. Before we start, we're going to show you a short video. Some technical difficulties. Thank you. One of our participants has raised that the video has no sound, so 1 second, please bear with us.
The Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk, your gateway to expert advice on intellectual property in Southeast Asia. In this video, we'll take you through the core services we offer to small and medium enterprises across Europe. Let's dive in and discover how we can support your business. We are an initiative of the European Commission providing free and confidential business-focused advice to European SMEs. Our mission is to guide you through the complexities of IP in Southeast Asia and help you safeguard your innovations and creations. Our Helpdesk offers a comprehensive suite of services tailored to meet the unique needs of European SMEs. Inquiry Helpline. Have an IP question related to Southeast Asia? Reach out to our Inquiry Helpline and receive expert advice within 3 working days. Or book a one-to-one meeting directly with our IP business advisor via this link right here. Training and webinars. Join one of our training sessions or webinars designed specifically for European SMEs across Europe and Southeast Asia throughout the year. Stay updated on upcoming activities by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media. Publications. Access a treasure trove of resources on our website, including country fact sheets, industry-specific IP guides, and general IP guides covering a variety of topics. Dive into our publications to enhance your understanding of IP laws and practices. Access a wide range of resources anytime, anywhere. IP business tools. Explore our IP cost and diagnostic tools. Accessible on our official website. These tools are crafted to empower you with the knowledge you need to navigate the IP landscape effectively. The Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk is your reliable partner and go-to resource for navigating the IP landscape in Southeast Asia. With a range of services at your disposal, we are committed to helping European SMEs protect their innovations and creations and succeed in the global market. Contact us today to take the first step towards securing your IP assets and unlocking new growth opportunities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. My name is Carolina, and I am from Eurocham Singapore and based in Singapore. On behalf of our chamber, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to the webinar AI and IP, Ownership, Protection, and Enforcement in ASEAN. Eurocham Singapore represents the collective interests of European businesses in Singapore, and we foster dialogue, we advocate for competitive business environment, and we provide a platform for industry collaboration across sectors. So today's session is an example of this, and it forms part of the Eurocham's continued commitment to support companies navigating emerging challenges at the intersection of technology, innovation, and regulation in the region. And so on that note, we would also like to express our appreciation to the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk for their collaboration for today's session. And so on that, let me briefly walk you through to this afternoon's flow. We will start with a keynote presentation by Dr. Matilde D'Amelio, CEO and founder of Sophia AI Training and Consulting Company. Dr. Emilio will open the session by framing an evolving landscape of AI and intellectual property in ASEAN. Then we will move on to our second speaker, Mr. Sebastian Ziliakus, Senior Director for Strategic Initiatives at Suntory. He will share a corporate perspective on the AI adoption here in Southeast Asia. And last, we will hear from Mr. Devon Lewis, partner at Shook, Lin and Bock, and also a Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk expert. And he will guide us through the legal dimensions of ownership, protection, and enforcement in the region. After these three presentations, we will move to our live Q&A session where the speakers will join us to take your questions. Unfortunately, Sebastian will have to leave at 5, but please feel free to put your questions in the question box, the Q&A at the bottom, and we will refer those questions to him. Just then a quick note on housekeeping before we begin. Like I said, we have a little Q&A box at the bottom that you can ask your questions throughout, and during the live Q&A, I will direct those questions to our speakers. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Matilde D'Amelio.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Carolina, and welcome everyone. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. Right, here we are. Okay, so I have prepared a few slides just to navigate through the concept, but what I'm going to do is kind of build a narrative around it. Just a little bit of an overview of what we are. So we are a company which is highly specialized in everything around AI, from the training to advisory to the development of custom-made, AI solutions. We were born in the UK. This is where our headquarters is based, but we are currently as well expanded in Southeast Asia, in APAC, and recently in May 2025, we started to operate as well in Southeast Asia, and we are based in Singapore. So what I'm going to do today is that I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of, first of all, why this topic is particularly important for organizations that are more and more embracing AI, and second, what is the situation at the moment in the ASEAN, and what are some key recommendations in terms of what you really should start to do starting from tomorrow. So first of all, why we're talking about IP, AI, to be honest, is a tool which has been in the market for like 15 years. Companies have already started to use AI in any sorts of forms in almost at least a decade. However, since ChatGPT, was released into the market, and then generative AI, large language models were become more and more popular, there have been more and more concern in terms of IP properties. When we're talking about intellectual properties, I think for organizations, first of all, it's important to distinguish that there are two levels of challenges when we're talking about IP. So understanding these two layers, I think it's very important to then think about regulation and then think about governance. One layer of intellectual property does sit into the owner of the technology, basically in the companies that do the training of the technology. The second layer does sit in organizations that use this technology, that use large language models, small language models, any type of generative AI solutions. These are organizations which are not training the algorithm, but are using the algorithm and are feeding the algorithm with quite a lot of sensitive information. So now the challenge, it does sit on this double layer, right, of IP protection. This is kind of unique in the AI space, and is a little bit of a challenge that countries and organizations they face at the moment to really understand how to tackle this problem. If we look specifically at the ASEAN nation, at the moment the picture is quite fragmented. So we have Singapore, which is kind of leading and leading the path in the region. It has a much more up-to-date regulation. I think the Copyright Act, which is back to the 2021, is already a good protection in place for organizations that are looking at training algorithm in Singapore and using AI algorithm in Singapore. But across the other countries, the regulation is quite outdated and is very fragmented. So if you look, for example, at key players such as Indonesia or Malaysia, when we look at the regulation in terms of IP protections, in terms of data protections, in terms of authorship protection, there is not a clear regulation there. There are quite a lot of gray areas, and also the regulation is quite fragmented. It's very dispersed. Now, this creates a challenge from a certain point of view for organizations that want to use one technology and deploy it in multiple regions in the ASEAN area, but also does represent an opportunities, because you can really think strategically about how to do it. Let me go to this point in 1 second. So first of all, where does the opportunity sit? The opportunity sits in the fact that Singapore is actually quite ahead of the game. It's the second most advanced country when it comes to intellectual property protection. Not only it's the second most advanced country, but it's also very fast in changing the regulation. There have been quite a lot of changes that have been happening in the latest year. So I mentioned that 2021 was a good update in the direction of data protection, but in 2023, the Singaporean government has further reviewed and improved any regulation around IP. So this is a very, very strong point when it comes to Singapore, again, because it's a market where regulation is changing, not as fast as the technology, because the technology is still ahead of the game at the moment, but it's changing, is catching up, quite quickly. The other, big benefit of having Singapore as a gateway, for AI innovation is that everything is done in English. So if you look, for example, at statistics, in the latest 2 years, the number of cases around the world for IP infringement when it comes to AI have become almost 10,000 more than what was before, if you think about ChatGPT was introduced. And for example, Stanford has done an interesting study that showed that in the coming 2 years, the number of lawsuits for IP infringement, it will rise even further. So there is a trend because there is the inability of governments at the moment to catch up at the same speed as the technology evolves. But having Singapore as a gateway, it's actually very beneficial also because of the language. There's going to be a lot of dispute racing internationally because we're going to see that this is quite a complex technologies. There are going to be different players which are going to play into the role. So having Singapore as a gateway, it does become kind of handy. I want also to mention it that Singapore has also a regulation which is better fitted for international dispute, which is extremely important when it comes to especially generative AI solution. The challenge of generative AI solution is that compared to other innovation solutions, compared to other innovation products, it's very difficult to do anything in-house. No one can do it, So what happens is that it's an hybrid solution when you have the provider of the tool, which is located somewhere, which can be, I don't know, US, which can be China, which can be Saudi Arabia. So these are the locations where the tools are actually trained. And then there is a level of adoption and application, which is going to become more regional. So this is a level of complexity which is quite unique, and that's the reason why having Singapore as a hub, it does become quite handy in this kind of gray area concept. There is also another element which I will say about Singapore, which is going to make it quite a suitable fit for making it AI hub also when it comes to regulation and IP protection, and is the fact that as all of you know, the government has invested quite a significant amount of funds to the upskilling and reskilling of the population from a technical point of view, but also from a legal point of view. So having a centralized point with so many expertise in-house is actually quite handy when it comes to the complexity of IP protection in this evolving landscape. The other thing is that there is also quite a significant incentive in terms of SaaS market growth and especially cloud capacity. So there is going to be more and more cloud capacity available in Singapore, which may seem a technical element, but actually has a huge implication from an IP protection, because having increasing cloud capacity, it will attract more and more vendor producers. So if you think, for example, Anthropic, OpenAI, they've already done agreement with the Singaporean government. What does it mean in practice? It means that there is going to be more and more availability for training the models directly in Singapore. And from an IP protection perspective, this is actually very beneficial for all the ASEAN region, because it means that Singapore, as a way to regulate, how not only the models will be adopted by the organization, but also how the the models will be trained, in the cloud system. So this investment in cloud capacity is actually very, very beneficial for the Singaporean market, and in my opinion, for all the region, right? Because it will bring more, control over this technology. The other thing which is very positive about Singapore is the agility for patent approval. I think in the latest year, the Singaporean government, the last stats that I saw, has approved more than 300 patents, which is a huge number if you consider the size, of Singapore. So the process for patent approval, patent renewal, it's very lean, it's very agile, and this is extremely beneficial, especially when it comes to a technology such as the generative AI, which is evolving very fast. So if you look at what was generative AI 6 months ago, it was very different than what is nowadays. So this combination of skills, this combination of agility into the patent approval, this investment in the cloud infrastructure, they are actually making, Singapore quite an interesting fit to become the central hub for IP, protection and regulation in all the ASEAN region. There is, however, something that I wanted to mention, and is for organizations, even though the Singaporean government it's quite ahead and is quite fast in making changes, it's still not fast enough to catch up with how the technology is evolving. The truth is that it's extremely difficult to catch up with this technology. So for companies, it's very important to not wait for regulation to happen, but started to implement an internal governance already, especially if you're operating in multiple countries in the ASEAN region, thinking about governance that could be applied across the different countries, it can be very beneficial. I'm from Europe, and I will take the example of the GDPR. This is exactly what happened when GDPR was implemented in Europe. It was difficult for businesses which were outside of Europe to deal with the GDPR, and also to look at the different regulation outside of the European Union. So some organizations, what they decided to do was to take the GDPR and implement it across the board, because they felt that it was still a more protective legislation compared to other environment. I'm not saying that you need to do something like that for AI, but thinking about an internal governance which tries to protect as more as possible the IP element and implement it across the board is actually going to be very beneficial. And I will go back to my initial point where I mentioned that when you think about IP protection, you need to think about two layers. One layer is on the training of the model, but this is out of the control of the business. There is nothing that can be done there by businesses. This is down to the regulation. So that one you have no control. But there is another element of IP protection which is more linked to how companies are using AI solutions, what sorts of data they are feeding to the models, what sorts of protection they do have in place. And this is where where companies they can already start to implement an internal governance. Right? It's on this element of IP. I will go a little bit on more details, but this is a little bit, the idea. Let's go a little bit of because we are in this stage where we are a little bit in a gray area, and then this where what is really important is when you think about developing your internal governance. First of all, look at what is the current regulation, of course, because you need to be in line with it. The second is that you need to have a system as more as possible transparent in-house in terms of how the information are fed and how information are processed. Normally, this is formalized under something which is called a model card. So whenever you are implementing a solution, then you need to build this model card, which brings transparency in terms of we as an organization, what data are we giving, are we providing, what data are we getting as an output, and are we using this data. This level of transparency is very important. The second element is the human in the loop. It's very important to put in place official IP audits. So think about the life cycle, which can be 1 year. How often do you want to do these IP audits? Who is in charge of it? What sort of checks are going to be done? The second is that you need to think about doing partnerships and contracting. So if you're, for example, you're implementing AI for your marketing team, I'm just taking this example because it's the more obvious, you need to think about making partnership, for example, with content providers. Because in this case, you're going to protect yourself because you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to use AI for content generation, but I'm going to use images and content which come from authorized source because I've done partnership with this agency, with this content producer. The same can apply in almost any sorts of department. And the other thing is, especially if you're operating in all the Asian region, it's fine to use Singapore as an hub, but the governance should be across the board. So having a unified governance across all the different countries in which are operating is going to be very beneficial because it's going to help to bring consistency. It will reduce dramatically the gray areas and will also help to the scalability of the solution because this is very important. You need to scale your solution to have a return on investment because otherwise this technology, it can become extremely expensive. So this is a little bit of wrap because I'm conscious of time, and I know that the other speakers they have to, they need also to bring their own expertise. So if we want to synthesize what are the key takeaway here. So first of all, having an internal governance and be ahead of the game, it's very important. Having this sort of harmonization across all the countries in ASEAN is also very important for the scalability and the reduction of the gray area. And last but not least, thinking about Singapore as an hub, it can be quite a strategic point of view because of the language, the legislation, the skills, and the cloud availability, which is ramping up. And that's it for my side. I will now hand over to Carolina and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Matilda, for making this such an easy presentation to follow, especially because sometimes looking at these things, it's very complex. So we thank you for that. Next, we have Sebastian. Sebastian, when you're ready.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Either way, before I start, a little bit of a background of myself. So I'm Swedish originally, but has lived in Singapore for about 18 years. Most time here in Singapore, but I had a good fortune to live some time in Bangkok, as well as in Lebanon, Beirut. And during my career, I've been focusing on emerging technologies, not as an engineer, but more so how do we apply them in business and how can they bring value both to the business as well as its consumers or customers. Now, before I share more about my experience using AI, I wanted to share a little bit better understanding of where we are today. So many of us are familiar probably with the brands listed here, and they can actually be categorized, in my perspective, as a web journey way. And this is also the different stages that I have felt I have gone through my career. So during in Web 1, it was normally very static websites. So this was probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. Generally, they call this read-only websites. It then moved over to what we call Web 2. That's when it started to be interactive websites, user-generated content. It's really when we could see Facebook started. But today's focus and objective is AI plus Web 3, and what these technologies can do and how it's been implemented across industries and company sizes to solve problems, specifically based on my experience. So a few years ago, I actually came across a project here in Singapore in the medical space. And this was a hand surgeon and an engineer that I was discussing with. And we were discussing a quite simple question, which is why is carpal tunnel syndrome one of the most common hand injuries, still diagnosed so differently across hospitals? And why is the golden standard test so painful and intrusive for patients? So let me dig this a little bit deeper. So we realized something very interesting. Actually, ultrasound is a better alternative to the golden standard. It's safe, it's non-invasive, and produces images that AI can analyze. But there was a problem. So ultrasound itself is highly operator dependent. And the image quality varies a lot depending on who's holding the probe. So our big question became, can AI help standardize image quality and make diagnosis more consistent? But before I explain how we approach that, so let me quickly set the scene of carpal tunnel syndrome itself. Carpal tunnel syndrome affects 3 to 6% of the global population, so that is roughly 250 to 500 million people. So quite a good use case from a business point of view. 20% of diabetic patients develop carpal tunnel syndrome, which could be a use case in itself. And carpal tunnel syndrome accounts for 90% of all referrals for neurophysiological tests. So, carpal tunnel syndrome actually happens when the median nerve in your wrist is compressed. So, it's often linked to either you have diabetes, or it could be pregnancy, it could be obesity, or repetitive wrist movements, which normally happens for office workers, gamers. And these symptoms range from mild pain to muscle weakness, could be numbness, or it could even be paralysis. So it really affects daily life, even to basic actions like buttoning your shirt or using a phone or a computer. So this, so that is clearly a problem worth undertaking as a company and as a business impact. So what we began, or rather say we began our journey to see if AI could standardize then the ultrasound images, as well as then help diagnose carpal tunnel syndrome. And to give a quick context from Singapore lens, patients often face long waiting times because there aren't enough hand or orthopedic specialists. And the current gold standard, which is called EMG, as I mentioned, is very invasive and painful. And the process involves inserting a needle, like electrode, directly into the muscle from here to here. And that's why it's very painful. So our objective was quite simple from here on. So we really wanted to understand how ultrasound can play a role in carpal tunnel syndrome diagnosis. We wanted to identify workflow issues and compare ultrasound with EMG, MRI, or X-ray. And thirdly, to really explore existing research, market solutions, or even patents that existed. We then mapped out our AI development process. So let me clarify, we had quite an extensive research background before we actually moved into the AI development process itself. And for that AI development process, we did four main things. One was to standardize the ultrasound procedure. The other one was to standardize how images are captured. Thirdly, we wanted to define how images should be interpreted. And lastly, we wanted to highlight what are the potential challenges with this. Now, we trained our model on roughly about over 11,000 ultrasound images from across Asia. And then we expanded the data set utilizing actually video recording from the ultrasound probe to capture even multiple frames to train the model even better. So the result of this was that our system reached 80% of accuracy in detecting carpal tunnel syndrome. And this was detected in normal, highly likely you have or you have it. And this was done even when you used a non-specialist utilizing the ultrasound probe. So the answer to this original question is quite clear. Yes, AI can make standardized, reliable carpal tunnel syndrome diagnosis possible. Now, one of our biggest hurdles in this was, of course, data limitations. We really needed to have enough ultrasound images to be able to build our model. Of course, being here in Singapore with the regulations, we needed proper patient consent and doctors or sonographers who could reliably classify and annotate these images are scarce. So we solved this by, as mentioned before, using pre-trained models. We also gathered additional data with help from even friends and family sometimes. Unfortunately, we had the first hand surgeon of Singapore on our board, so that definitely helped. But we also partnered with research institutions such as Singapore Institute of Technology, SIT, under a R&D agreement to really support our annotation works. So once this data challenge was under control, we moved into our AI development process, which pretty much happened in two different phases. So the first phase was we used deep learning model to segment this carpal tunnel syndrome area and extract the features. We then we applied clinical rules to diagnose carpal tunnel syndrome from those features. And then we built a simple user interface to demonstrate how the algorithm works on pre-selected images. And then we even established an imaging protocol, which then led us into a phase two, which is training our own deep learning model and create a formal image annotation protocol. Let me just, I hope you guys can see me. And then we also, with the improved accuracy to 87%. Now, you'll notice here that research looks like it's two simple steps, but development actually took five, while our time was mostly spent on the first two. So in my experience, it really shows how important it is to really start with the end in mind. I also wanted to actually share a solution utilizing AI plus Web3 or blockchain that I really like, which is developed by Ant Digital's AI stack, which combines EKYC or know your customer, multimodal reasoning, and blockchain into quite a resilient workflow. As its core, Solos, which is the name of the product, uses AI to detect fake images and videos during a KYC process, where it really spots micro expressions, can even spot skin textural artifacts as well as abnormal eye movement. And then this AI produces a risk score for each verification attempt. And this, of course, because it's utilized by Ant, it's really trained on large data sets of counterfeits and deepfakes, and then support thousands of ID types across many countries. And this capability is strengthened by, it's a complicated word, but LAVCOT, which really stands for Language Aware Visual Chain of Thoughts. And this is then a multilingual and multimodal reasoning engine that breaks problems into stages. So this could be extraction from images, it could be various languages, as well as then step-by-step logical reasoning. And the result is not just a single answer, but a consistent, explainable reasoning trail across languages and visual inputs. Now, finally, blockchain provides, on top of this, an immutable audit layer where AI risk scores and verification proofs can be hashed on-chain to create a tamper-proof logs. This enables three practical benefits from regulated businesses, in my perspective. The first one is auditability. So you can really find a immutable history for compliance and investigations. You can also do a privacy preferred preserving sharing. So that means that you can have partners validating the identity without exposing the raw personal identification information. And lastly, you have a kind of a consortium defense within your company. So you can detect fraud patterns that can actually be shared across institutions to prevent repeated attacks. So together, these three layers, AI for detection, the LAVCOT for robust reasoning, and blockchain for trust, forms a quite a powerful, scalable solution for secure digital identity and fraud prevention. If I take this as a technology and how it could actually be implemented as a real scenario, maybe not in finance, but in luxury retail. So as an example, I'm in Sweden. I want to buy a Rolex watch from a Swiss online retailer. It's a high value purchase like this. Both the seller and I need to know that I'm real, the documents are real, and the product is real. So through this, Solos could verify my identity by checking my Swedish ID and selfie, ensuring that I'm not using a fake document or deepfake. The LAVCOT analyzes the Rolex warranty card, certificates, and listing images to confirm nothing has been tampered with, which then protects both me as well as the retailer from any counterfeit paperwork or manipulated visuals. Once this trust is established between us, the cross-border payments can handle foreign exchange conversion, anti-money laundering checks, as well as the fast settlement between Sweden and Switzerland, giving the retailer guaranteed payment and, of course, giving me a smooth checkout. And when the actual watch is shipped, the retailer issues me a blockchain-based digital certificate, which linked to the Rolex serial number, which means that when it arrives, I can simply utilize my phone to scan the NFC tag to see if immutable provenance, proof that the watch is authentic. So in this one purchase journey, the three different solutions together with blockchain work together to make an entire experience quite secure, trusted, and transparent. So in my perspective, I really find this quite amazing. However, as we have seen, AI can provide a lot of good for us, but it can also pose a threat by fabricating highly convincing digital documents, such as receipts, for example. So, as an example, quite curious, which one of these do you think is fake? You don't need to answer that question, but to reduce that, we have to be more resourceful by exploring other emerging technologies. So, for instance, recently I have encountered a situation of counterfeit products in the consumer goods industry. And for within that consumer goods industry, specifically the alcohol industry, the premium and collectible categories creates a serious risk. So fake purchase proofs can be used to deceive retailers, can exploit loyalty programs, as well as inflate resale values or falsely claim ownership of limited edition bottles. As these AI-generated fakes becomes harder to detect, traditional verification methods are no longer sufficient. That's where blockchain as a Web3 technology offers a powerful countermeasure. And by recording the tokenized bottles on an immutable and transparent ledger, brands can ensure each bottle has a verifiable and tamper-proof digital identity. This also makes it impossible for counterfeit receipt or ownership claims to hold up against the official chain of records, which means consumers, border agencies, maybe trade partners can therefore prevent counterfeit goods to be consumed with confidence. So within a landscape where digital forgery is becoming effortless, blockchain can be an additional layer of emerging technology to provide trust and then anchor, which helps them brands protect their products, safeguard customer relationship, and prevent fraud at scale. As there are counterfeit products in the market, we are fighting it using the latest technology that anyone can use. So it's really a combination of software and hardware, blockchain and NFC chip. And NFC chip is something you can find in any debit, credit card, bank card, for example. So to really protect the brand equity, we want to make sure that customers that love drinks is provided with a what we call a proof of consumption. So not only people that collect bottle but taste it. So the purpose of implementing counterfeit protection is to provide original images of proof of consumption and then challenge a way of providing brand experience while using new technologies and services such as blockchain and original images as a backdrop. From consumer, as the value is that they can obtain an original image as proof of consumption as part of the experience of drinking a premium bottle. For the company, there is value being able to provide a brand experience that goes beyond just drinking itself. So with this implemented, we have already received positive feedback about the issuance of drinking certificates, as well as enjoying, of course, our alcoholic beverages. And we will definitely continue to consider initiatives backed by blockchain technology as we seek to bring even greater joy to our consumers through our products and services. Now, using these learnings from successful launch of limited premium whiskies and wine, we further aim to create innovative consumer experiences and explore new avenues for brand engagements. As a final point, both from my personal experiences building up AI as its own business or utilizing AI in an overall business from startup SME as well as MNC as Suntory. I wanted to share just some key learnings from my perspective. as a summary. So the first one is implement AI in the right way. And what I mean with that is we should not rush to implement AI solution without knowing where we are heading. So going back to the medical industry example, really takes time to fully understand how AI can support your business, consumers, and partners. Second one to me is questioning the results. We should always keep iterating the process of understanding input output, as sometimes AI models produce different results with the same question. The third one to me is data set, which is one of the most important part when applying AI. And that is, what do you really want to measure? What is the success or business problem you are trying to solve? Do you have the necessary data sets to begin with? And are they structured to provide the right desired outcome? It should really solve a problem for you, your customers, or your partners itself. I think another one is thoughtfulness in implementation. It's something Matilda actually brought up, and going back to governance. So going back to the process I shared before, think long-term on AI implementation, as there are or will be regulations on AI in the future. And we also want to implement AI ethically. So this also includes the security risks of AI agents, even speaking with each other, which potentially could combine or contain confidential information. The fifth point, in my perspective, is really balancing trust and scale. If you don't share to your consumers why the AI made the decision as a customer, it could lead to suspicion. It could be perceived as loss of control. And scaling can also lead to data protection challenges. So implementing a policy guideline framework with audit trail is a really good practice with implementing AI. And lastly, I would say when it comes to competitive advantage, as we can see, startups, medium companies, MNCs, all applying AI in one way or another, sometimes this doesn't become the competitive advantage itself. But also when we look at this, sometimes large language models is not the right approach, but many times it is. And in the near future, most companies will have AI implemented in one way or another. Therefore, in my perspective, more importantly, it's not utilizing AI itself, but based on what unique data sets you as a company have and what that can solve or provide more value to your customers and partners is more important in my perspective. Because I really believe utilizing technology should bring us closer to our customers, not further away from our customers. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I'll leave it over to you, Carolina.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. It was great, and it's always wonderful to have specific case studies on how you've implemented AI. It really gives a visual on how the technology is being used and what are the practical or ways sometimes that we haven't thought about how it could be used. Thank you very much for that. And next, Javon.
Thanks, Caroline. So I'd just like to start off by introducing myself. So I wear two hats. So I'm an IP tech and data privacy lawyer with Strickland & Bock, a Singapore law firm. But apart from that, I also assist the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk. So in my capacity as a lawyer, I handle both contentious and non-contentious IP-related matters, as well as technology disputes. On the IP SME Helpdesk side, The IPSME Help Desk is a initiative of the European Commission, which provides free, confidential, business-focused advice to European SMEs and intermediaries. Right? We saw this in the video earlier on. I just want to highlight a few points. They have various services which are free. The first being an inquiry helpline. So you can submit any IP questions you have to the Southeast Asia Help Desk, and you can expect a reply within 3 working days. They also have training, workshops, and webinars, such as this one. These are regular sessions tailored to SMEs in Europe and Southeast Asia. They also have a newsletter, which I would encourage you to sign up for, so you get regular updates as well as to follow them on social media. They have publications which cover a wide range of matters, such as country fact sheets, industry-specific guides, infographics, and general IP resources, all very much focused on Southeast Asia. And finally, they have learning tools as well, such as the IP diagnostic and IP cost tools that help European SMEs estimate the cost for IP registration. So these are all free services. Please go and check them out. If you are keen to also explore this further, you can have a one-to-one consultation with the IP business advisor, Benoit. So you can engage with them and the link provided. And again, this consultation is free for your EU SMEs. So turning to the presentation that I'm going to be giving for today, my focus is going to be on using AI for IP enforcement. Right? So we're going to cover the challenge that is faced by businesses, not just in Singapore, but I believe also around the world. Singapore's AI legal and policy framework. I'm just going to very briefly cover this because it's already been covered by one of the earlier speakers in more detail. The AI-powered enforcement tools and strategies, what we actually do see being practiced in the market. Some practical implementation essentials to take note of. And finally, some next steps for you to consider. So the start is really this, what I call this convergence crisis, right? And here we've heard about how AI is being used extensively to generate content, as well as in many different fields, like Sebastian told us. But apart from that, there are also actual legal issues such as ownership of the generation of the content generated, as well as how do you protect the content you have generated once you have your own content or your own IP assets, right? How do you employ them for protection of your work? And the gap that has arisen is that with AI, you have a very high rate of generation of content creation, of output, whereas your traditional methods of trying to police and enforce your IP rights against such online digital content, it traditionally wouldn't be able to keep up, right? That's the problem and gap that we are seeing. So what does it matter? Companies are now, of course, facing ever-increasing IP enforcement challenges if they continue to rely on non-AI powered solutions. So as you have heard, Singapore is leading the region in this regard. There's a lot of IP, AI innovation happening. But apart from that, it's also a jurisdiction that balances innovation and protection, right? So when we talk about the AI IP framework, what I want to focus on more is the key legal instruments. So we heard very briefly about it from the first speaker, but the Copyright Act 2021. So that was a major overhaul of Singapore's Copyright Act to sort of position it to take into account new emerging technologies. And one of the key exceptions is what we call the computational data analysis exception. So this is something that allows creators of AI, large language models and algorithms to actually utilize data sets, right, which have copyright protection, but to utilize it for the purposes of data mining and analysis and to train the AI models, right? So that's an exception that was statutorily created in Singapore's updated Copyright Act. You also heard about the Patents Act, which allows for AI inventions to be protected. IPOS, the IP Office of Singapore, has helpfully provided guidance on when AI invention would be considered patentable and when it would not be considered patentable. So that's harkening back to the earlier days when software patents per se were not permitted under many IP regimes. But of course, that has now become, considering what exactly is innovative in a software patent, that's where the additional guidance comes in. So first principles wise, it has not changed dramatically, but how it's being applied and interpreted to new innovations such as AI inventions is what Singapore has been pushing itself to be at the forefront of. So apart from that, of course, you have the government approach of promoting AI innovation, strengthening IP protection mechanisms like the Copyright Act I mentioned. And there are still ongoing consultations that are regularly being put forward by IPOS, by the Ministry of Law as well, to take into account recent developments. But as was already mentioned earlier, technology always leads, right? Regulations and the law always follows. So when we talk about AI enforcement, generally there are three key aspects to it. First, the detection, right? So that's the content recognition, identifying what is the infringing content. That can be done, what we've seen, you have something called digital fingerprinting, where it's different from watermarking, right? Watermarking is where you have a express a mark on the actual work itself, whereas fingerprinting would be identity mechanism by which a digital identity is then created specifically for a particular work. So then it can be traced and its provenance can then be checked, right? And of course, AI would do it across a whole variety of platforms, not just one. When we talk about action, once you've detected it, what do we do? AI systems can, and especially if they're integrated with your online content systems, they can issue potentially automatic takedown notices and sending off notices to potential infringers of the infringing acts and the infringing content that's been detected. But the very important step in all of this is, of course, verification. So where you have genuine work or materials, what was mentioned before, the blockchain authentication process is very important. That's one useful tool that can be used. But another one, of course, we shouldn't dismiss human oversight protocols. So we are still involved in the process, whereby we still review and look at what are the outcomes or the actions being taken by the AI tool, right? Because there can be mistakes, there can be errors, and then you need to have another protocol in place to resolve any appeals or issues that may arise from that, right? So that could then lead to dispute resolution processes, whether you are taking action against the infringer or an innocent party, right? Sometimes the AI makes a mistake and they are then seeking to redress against whatever actions have been taken against them. But the combined approach, right? This is where AI really shines, is that it's able to deliver speed, scale, and at an accuracy that previously was not possible. It is not impervious to any errors, but it does have a high degree of accuracy. We're going to look at some real-world examples, and actually, this was sort of covered previously where we talked about trademark monitoring. So we've always been able to do trademark searching, especially of images, right? That's been around for a long time. But now it's not just searching for an image, but rather doing that search in a particular context. And I think that's the important part about using the AI tool, is that it can also appreciate a context. So you have the use in e-commerce platforms, social media, global marketplaces, and being able to understand when that use may be legitimate and authorized, and when it may not be so, and actually amounts to a counterfeit good, right? So these determinations and checks can be done within hours and not weeks. Another application that we have been very familiar with is where companies do have a portfolio of IPs, patents being part of it. and you have a sizable portfolio of patents, sometimes monitoring when infringements take place can be quite a challenge. So again, with AI, being able to scan the landscape, competitors, and websites, and rather what they're doing, and then assessing, doing a sort of a first cut analysis against the claims that a patent might have, determining whether or not there's potential infringement, assigning certain risk scores to it, and then providing that to a decision maker to decide, is this something that you want to proceed to take enforcement action against, or to simply let it go, because it may not have construed the context accurately or correctly. But I think as large language models improve, you're going to see greater accuracy in the way AI understands what's happening in the real world and is then able to determine, do an evaluation and determine whether or not a patent document or patent claim is being infringed or not. So that's the issue, right? The key capability being that from going beyond keywords to actually the conceptual similarities, being able to make that determination is going to become increasingly important. And I think that's the direction in which certain AI IP enforcement tools are going to be moving in. So having established that there may be an infringement, then having AI systems kick in to take down or to take enforcement action would be actually one of the best instances of the use of AI for an enforcement tool. So if it's integrated together with social media networks, many of our platforms already have such takedown notices and mechanisms in place. They're already built in. So integrating them with your AI tools will provide almost real-time action on the part of the brand proprietor to be able to take protective steps for the brand. Right? So the estimate is that there's going to be a reduction in time from 70 to 80% from the detection to the takedown. Now, looking at the Singapore side of things, some of the legal considerations, right? When we talk about valid takedown requirements under Singapore law, actually there isn't something specifically prescribed, but the first thing, of course, is to be able to establish that you have rights under Singapore law that can be enforced. So, for example, if you have a registered trademark, that needs to be in place, right? Some sort of proof that a registration exists, that's something that platforms already require. Liability risks, and by this, we already know that AI can have hallucinations already when you're doing generative AI tasks, right? They are prone to hallucinations. Likewise, there can be a risk where you have false positives being put forward. So when you have such false positives, it's important to have some sort of a process or protocol in place whereby they can be checked, and if there is a sort of a feedback loop from a party against whom a takedown notice is being issued incorrectly, that can then be prevented, right? There's a way for the proprietor to then step in to say, no, we're not going to take action in this particular case because it's a mistake, right? So that's important. Otherwise, you have innocent parties being subject to AI takedowns for no reason. The PDPA implications. So I'm approaching this from the enforcement side of things. So when I talk, I don't see PDPA as a major risk when you're talking about it from the enforcement side, because I would assume a party has put up this information on, let's say, a platform, whether they have shared, the infringer has shared any personal information, or is in a commercial context, they are putting across, sales of infringing goods. So AI scraping and putting together sort of the personal data of such a person in that particular situation is not likely to fall foul of the PDPA. So that's the angle at which I'm approaching it. So the other issues I think that were raised by the other speakers on the PDPA potential issues still apply, but I'm saying looking at it from the enforcement side. So from that perspective, it's not likely to be a significant issue when it comes to the PDPA and using AI tools to enforce IP rights against individuals or businesses. When we talk about cross-border enforcement, right? So your platforms are already functioning across borders, across various ASEAN countries. And we talk about the enforcement. That's where it can be complicated because of the different rules. Most ASEAN countries do have the basic requirements. They have already met your PCT, your TRIPS agreement requirements. They are also, most of them are signed up to your PCT treaties, the Madrid Protocol. So they all provide for all these certain basic levels of protection. But the devil's in the details, as they say. So when it comes to enforcement, are you then able to, well, first of all, assuming you can integrate with the platform, apart from that, taking action on the ground, each country may have a different legal system. For example, Singapore, Malaysia are common law countries, whereas Indonesia and Thailand are civil law countries. So you have this distinction coming out. So there can be complexities when it comes to the actual on-the-ground enforcement that if you want to take follow-up action after the AI has detected and attempted to do a takedown, you want to do follow-up enforcement action, that can be a bit more complex where it's going to span various borders, right? When you talk about documentation standards for potential litigation, so in Singapore at least, when you're engaging in litigation, you need to have evidence given by an individual, right? So if your AI is collecting all this evidence and documenting it, at the end of the day, you still need a person to come to court and say, this is what the AI tool has collected, right? And he has to be able to explain in a defensible manner the AI process, how it went about obtaining this information, why the documents obtained are not are rigorous, and that it's not something that the AI hallucinated or created. If there's any way in which it can show the originality, or rather the authenticity of the documents that have been the evidence that has been gathered, then that's also important. So I would imagine that if an AI tool is being used, you would need someone who is familiar with the tool, not just from the functionality, but also from the technical point of view, to be coming to court to actually give evidence on why the AI tool has collected satisfactory evidence of infringement. Excuse me. So when you talk about an enforcement strategy, where do you start? First of all, it may not be feasible to simply protect everything, right? So instead, what is encouraged is to focus on identifying your high value assets that actually require protection, and that as a starting point. And then selecting options with your vendors to either build a solution or buy one off the shelf. You got to evaluate which option is going to work best for your particular situation and what you are trying to protect. When it comes to design, right? Designing processes that need to be put in place, and I can't stress the importance of having some human oversight at various checkpoints. And another example of that would be escalation pathways. So even if there's an enforcement action taken or takedown notice sent, it should have the potential to be escalated in case there is no response from the alleged infringer. It can be escalated to a person so that there is some human oversight to see whether or not the action taken was legitimate. If it is, then whether or not further enforcement action by way of legal action may be necessary, right? So designing a proper process that includes human oversight at key points would be quite important. And then, of course, integrating it within an existing business workflow, that would be key so that there's efficiency when it comes to the enforcement strategy. And of course, ultimately, you need to measure whether or not the amount you're spending on your AI enforcement tool is actually bringing benefit to the business, right? That's in definable KPIs to track whether or not your commercial objectives are being attained. And again, having a bit of a feedback loop so that there can be continuous improvement on the way the AI tool is actually functioning specifically for your particular use cases. When we talk about the implementation of AI IP tools, I think there are just a few that I want to focus on. One is internal capability. So understanding what skills and resources you have in your own organization is also very determinative of the kind of AI tool you're going to adopt. If you have a lot of IT resources, then a more complex tool can be selected, right? That also goes towards your vendor evaluation. Whereas if you don't have that level of resources or capabilities, a more general off-the-shelf AI tool might be more suitable, right? Another aspect is team requirements, and what I mean by this is AI tools don't function in isolation. They function together with your IP legal teams, IT teams, and business units. So business has to identify what are the commercial objectives, what are the valuable products and services, and what's the relevant IP that protects these goods and services. And then you have your IT side implementing the AI tool to be able to protect it, right? And IP and legal working together to ascertain whether this is effectively being done, right? So in case that, first of all, it is running as intended, and second, wherever escalation is necessary, they are in place to make sure that they can take the necessary steps. And of course, the budget, right? That's ultimately something that has to be considered very carefully when you're selecting an AI enforcement tool. A number of tools are built for various jurisdictions, especially in Singapore. Many of the tools are from overseas for the US market, potentially for the EU market. But then you have to ascertain whether or not those tools can be properly adopted and applied for the ASEAN market, for example, right? It may or may not be the case. So you have to consider that aspect quite carefully. And I think a certain level of acceptance that this is not a one-off process. It is something that's continuous. It's going to, as technology shifts and advances and keeps accelerating, so will business processes to learn to adopt and adjust to the landscape shifts that are taking place, right? So we come to what potential next steps you can take, perhaps to simple steps, really. One is conducting an AI IP monitoring assessment. Okay, so this is a simple step that you can do by having clear ownership protection protocols in place for your IP assets. If you're using generative AI, as some of the other speakers have shown us some really fantastic use cases, then again, ensuring that you understand what is the ownership you have over the assets generated, right? And then having good protection protocols in place. So how are you going to go about protecting your assets, your goods, your services? Do you have particular digital frameworks in mind, or are you going to use things like, for example, blockchain? So these are things to consider. Again, identify, because as I said, you may not be able to do it for every IP asset, but identifying your key IP assets and perhaps starting using them as a starting point would be a good place. And finally, the enforcement protocol, right? Creating something that really cuts across, because I can't emphasize this enough, but simply adopting an AI tool will not be enough. It will not solve the problem, right? It has to be implemented properly within a broader organizational framework. And that has to cut across not just it doesn't just stop with your IT side or the legal side, and it also includes your commercial and business people. Every team needs to talk to each other to ensure that the AI tool is working as it is intended, right? And of course, finally, do consult industry toolkits, help desks such as the IP SME help desk, and you can get specialized legal counsel if needed. So this is just something from the IP SME Helpdesk. There's a new publication called the Singapore IP Country Fact Sheet that's now available, and you're encouraged to have a look at it. It gives a very good overview of Singapore's IP position. So if you have any feedback to the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk, feel free to use the QR code to submit your feedback. And with that, I think I'm done, Carolina.
Thank you very much, Javon. For everybody listening, I think you have a great blueprint on what you should do for IP protection. So thank you so much. We will now open the floor for Q&A. We have a couple of minutes. So we have some questions, and I'll read the first one. I think this is for Matilda, but Javon, also feel free to compliment if you feel there's anything also that you can add. Having transparency for processes in place is already a challenge, but how to maintain such transparency once I deploy agents which do the job, but not always in a standardized way? Actually, finding new approaches is the job of the agents as well.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question because I mean AI agent is one of the most requested AI solution at the moment. We're actually even working in Singapore with an Asian cosmetic company which is implementing a portfolio of AI agent. Couple of points from my side. In AI agent, what is really important is to start with by what is called transparency by design. That is extremely important. What does it mean in practice? Is that when you are implementing AI agent, first of all, it has to be happen in stages. I don't recommend to go for an agent and from the first moment is already giving you recommendation about what to change and implementing the changes. The first thing that you need to do is to map out what is the process that the agent is going to do. That is the first step. And that is what is the transparency by design. So you map out what is the new process. In this new process, you identify where risk sits, you identify what mitigation actions are needed, and this is how you start to do the deployment of the agent. After you've done it for a while, you've learned it. You've learned the process, you've learned the technology, you've learned the criticalities. Then you can move into the layer 2 of the agentic solution, which is now the system is going to give you feedback on how to implement the system, on how to implement the process. So when you move into this feedback part, then you still cannot automatize it. And again, the concept of transparency by design becomes important because what happens is that I will take the feedback, I will review the feedback, and I will implement the feedback in a controlled way. So I know exactly what changes have been implemented. I may identify criticalities. I may put in place some sorts of audit and control. Then the third layer, it does become, okay, now I masterize the technology. I know what criticality sits. I have a governance in place, which has been now robust enough. Then I can think about having this agent, which almost semi-automatically lead to process improvement and thus become truly intelligent agent. That is my main recommendation. This is how you implement transparency by design, and you do it in phases. Starting with completely roll out and say, I'm going to use the agent not only to streamline the process, but also to let this agent review and improve it automatically. It's very, very risky. If you do it with generative AI, you have low control on the transparency, and also you have low control on when human intervention is needed. And this will be my last comment, is that this having low control on really when human intervention is needed has two risks. One is that I'm over assessing human intervention. So I'm putting way too human intervention elements in the process, which dramatically jeopardize your return on investment and risk also to undermine the faith into the technology and in the process. The second element is that you're underestimating the human intervention, and then you may have a number of risks which can emerge depending on what is the error, the mistakes, the hallucination which is generated. That's why you need to go in phases, and you need to really settle down as you get along where human intervention is needed and make it transparent. That would be my answer.
Thank you, Matilda. I think for the sake of time, we have time for one more answer, so I will not comment, but you said so many interesting things. there. But I'll go to the second question, which is how to avoid data breach using agentic AI, especially in finance and fintech company. I think maybe Javon, you could take this.
Sure, Carolina, thank you. So I think the first aspect, of course, would be your having a good data privacy policy so that your users who are going to be using your website and then coming onto your agentic AI and using it are properly covered under your data privacy policy, right? Which clearly sets out what you're collecting, what information you're collecting, and what you're using it for, and the consent from the user, right? But in using the agentic AI, I think at least under Singapore personal data privacy laws, you would be able to rely on various exceptions, one of them being the implied consent exception as well. So you have, first of all, that first part of your data privacy issues of collecting the data. So that should not be a major issue when you're using your agentic AI. Then comes, other aspects of whether or not you're using the agentic AI in a manner that may go beyond the purposes for which you have collected that data, right? So that's something I think perhaps it goes back to the first question of the design itself, making sure that it's not going to go beyond the specific purposes in your policies, right? When it comes to protection of personal data, which is another obligation, that's to me, it's quite separate from the issue of the agentic AI. It's just a question of putting in place adequate cybersecurity protections and to make sure that you don't fall to data breaches, right? I think that would be my answer in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Javon.
May I add one more thing?
Oh,
If
of
that's
course,
all right.
please, Matilda.
Very quickly, and that's fine. I would just add a couple of comments from a more technical perspective, which are linked together to our own questions and Florian's follow-up question. When it comes to agent, there are a couple of elements. There is a huge risk which comes from the use of API in terms of data breach. When you think about AI agent, there is an increasing dependence on API. Now, if you look at the stats, what happened is that majority of the organization, they don't have full visibility on the API, which are basically these doors which open up to the external. And this is where you become extremely vulnerable to data breach. So from a technical point of view, it's very important to really track and monitor all your API. And I will also link to Florian, how you do it in a more sustainable and responsible way, especially when you have multiple agents interacting, is about building an AI agent orchestrator first. You need to have this orchestrator, and then within the orchestrator, you build a multi-agent. It's not the other way around. You don't start to develop different agents, and then you integrate, you have the orchestrator, or the APIs are connected, and within that, in a sustainable way, you implement and test different solutions. Before as a standalone, and then as multi-agents which connect to each other. That was my technical comment that I wanted to make. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. Thank you so much. And I was just going to say that we are right on the dot. It's already time to say goodbye. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to email us here at Eurocham. Or as Javon said as well, if you have any IP concerning questions, you have the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk that you can also do your specific questions to your specific company or queries. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank all of our attendees today. We hope that you found this session insightful and useful for your work. And also thank you to our wonderful speakers for sharing with us your knowledge and your time. We wish all of you a fantastic rest of the week and happy holidays. Bye.
Have a wonderful day. Evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.